Today I just want to talk of the question of how. That's a question that I've received a couple different times, and people don't even really know honestly how to ask the question how. How did Elijah pass away? And I understand the sentiment and the people's almost trepidation of even knowing how to ask that question, because they don't want to come across harsh um, or insensitive by any means, and I get that, but I do think it's appropriate to share a little bit of our story and a little bit of how Elijah passed away. It's appropriate, and I'm honored to share that because it gets to another question of how by the end of this. So, how did Elijah pass away? Elijah Michael was born uh, late November of 2011, and right away we fell in love with the little man. He's a little fur ball, and so cute, so hairy, and we just loved him so much. And at 3 months old, we noticed him having his first seizure, and so March 1st of 2012 was the starting point, really, of a one-year journey that we were going to go on to that date, with Elijah and all of his physical limitations that we're going to discover. Through the seizure activity, we eventually were led down the path to meet with neurologists and find out that he is having infantile spasms, which are actually very debilitating type of seizures for infants. It can slow down or stop some of the progress that babies need to have in order to continue to grow and develop. As we were meeting with neurologists, we eventually went to a hospital with specialists in this field, and they took some scans and did a lot of different studies on Elijah to figure out exactly what they could possibly be working with, and found that his brain is actually too smooth. Our brains are meant to have lots of ridges, and Elijah's didn't have nearly enough, and so he had a smooth brain, or too smooth of a brain, and so because of that, that explained a lot of the seizure activity. And there are some technical terms that go along with all of these things. So Lissencephaly, Pachygyria, those are some terms that we didn't know of or had ever heard of before, but quickly became familiar with what these terms meant and what those terms imply with diagnosis, realizing and recognizing that our son was, if he was going to survive, if he was going to live, it was going to be for a certain duration of time, and he'd be most likely paraplegic. I mean, there were just lots of terms. Eventually, we had some genetic testing done to see some different sorts, and in doing so, found out that he had an issue with his as a mitochondrial disease, to where his cells, the fuel part of his cells, weren't functioning and were starting to shut down. And in the midst of all of this, he's still having these infantile spasms, and so all of these things kind of lead up to the point of his body not only stops developing and progressing, but then it actually starts to regress, to where we had to eventually put a feeding tube in him so that he would be able to receive nourishment, and then his body continued to regress, where he not only wasn't able to swallow, which is the reason for the tube, but his body wasn't able to start digesting and properly just fully functioning in those sorts. And so we had to help him pretty much in every way possible the last little bit of time that we had with him on this earth, to live and to function, and eventually beyond the digestive issues, beyond the developmental issues, beyond the seizure activity, it got to the point where his body just couldn't handle all of it anymore, and he got sick. And then they brought in a hospice team met with us to go through a plan of action of what would be best and most comfortable, a comfort plan, if you will, for our son. And we decided that the best for everyone is for him to be in our home for the last little bit that we had, and so we brought some machines home. And a year to date from his first seizure was when we said goodbye to our son, and the breathing machine couldn't help him anymore, and he went from our arms into Jesus' arms. The bigger question is really, how are we able to tell this story? How did we make it? How are we able to carry on? And honestly, the answer through all of that story of that year and the 8 years following, and even to this point today, the answer of how to all of us is Jesus. Jesus is how we're able to do it. Jesus is our strength. Jesus is our rock. Jesus is our anchor. Jesus is our hope. Jesus is our ultimate healer. Scripture says that in our weakness, He's made strong. Meaning that in our moments of weakness where we can't do what we need to do or should do, God's strength is more than enough for us, and He's glorified. And that's the truth of our journey and our story. In that season, we were incredibly weak. I was incredibly weak. I still am incredibly weak. But He's still strong. And in the same way that we had to help our son, whose body was deteriorating before our eyes, his function was no more, and he was very limited. He needed us to be strong for him. He needed us to help him. He needed us to come alongside to give the nourishment and the care and the need that he literally could not do himself. So we were strong for him. And in the same way, God is that for me. That in my limitations, in my brokenness, in my frailty, He's strong for me. He does for me what I can't do myself. And the great news is, He wants to do the same for you. He wants to be your strength. He wants to be your source. He's not expecting you to have it all together or have all the answers or to do everything on your own. Instead, you can just simply look to Him, and He'll be your source. In your weakness, He can be strong. And you know, that's part of this Elijah effect, is recognizing through the life of one little boy how my life is so similar, that really I need a father to come along and do for me what I can't do myself. It's where I'm at. It's where I need to be. That's where I'm supposed to be. Is weak and frail and in need of something so much bigger than myself. And the quicker we realize that and recognize that, the sweeter life truly is. And I hope and I pray that you would discover that for yourself. Thanks for watching.